Okay, so what is it? PPM number 39. Now, so as it turns out, it's going to be the first time that we had a little snafu with the process. Before I left Hofstra on the 11th of March, so almost 2 weeks ago, to go to Albuquerque. So I taught in the morning, and then evening I flew out to Albuquerque. I was gathering my things, and I made copies of the pages, that I'd be reading for the next couple of weeks. And because the original binders of the material that I wrote and typed out for, as I went along in the year in 2004 of writing this material, I kept it in a binder, two binders actually. They're in my office at Hofstra. I made copies of that material, and I've been sort of toting them around in a manila file right here. And so far so good, as far as having the right material that I was going to be reading. But lo and behold, and coincidentally, because yesterday was the first day that I started to sort of link the pieces that I wrote originally and typed out and printed out and put in the binders to the book, Being and Learning, that ultimately was published 7 years after the experiment was completed in 2005. It was published in 2012. Coincidentally, yesterday I happened to start linking up where I was in terms of the book and the original first draft. I mean, there was editing that went on, but a lot of the material just, went in right from the binder to the book, so to speak. And so, anyway, as I was just about to get ready to read this material for today, I realized that today the meditation, the printout was missing. So page 67 is missing. So I believe that is the page that is the only one that's missing, which would have been the one that I would have been reading today. So yep, no, 66 and 67. So yesterday I left off after that discussion, that quotation of Arendt, and then about thinking in Penelope's web. So if you want to back up and watch the video from yesterday, you can check out the discussion of Arendt's metaphor of thinking as like Penelope weaving and unweaving. Finished up there, and that was page 65. And then lo and behold, I went to get 67 and 66 and 67. They weren't there. So for the first time in this reading, I'm going to actually have to read from Being and Learning itself. And I found the pages that this material that was originally written in March 23rd, 2004. I found exactly where we are. And so I'm going to read that from the book, which is interesting. First time I've done that. So let me just make sure I mark the spot that I'm supposed to end. And of course, when you need it, a pencil's not available. Here we go. All right. Yeah. Now I don't intend to do this unless I have to, because the idea here was to be reading the original materials as it was printed out. But in this case, I'm going to read it from Being and Learning, and there you are. So pages 61 to 63. Remember, the last sentence from the meditation from yesterday was, together the webs we weave and unweave together cultivate community, a philosophy of the people. Where do we wander in learning together? We might approach this question in a twofold manner. First, we might explore the location, the where, topos, of our wandering. Second, we might explore the manner or way of our being together as we wander. These two moments overlap. The sage's wandering cultivates a philosophy of the people. Through evocative speaking, the posing of ultimate first questions, the sage draws apprentices out of the habitual habitation of duracality, of self-certain knowing. Learning is the quest and creation of meaning through the mutual exploration of unanswerable but urgent questions. The sage brings the tidings of this meaning-making journey by offering the gift of teachability. Heidegger calls this gift what is most thought-provoking. He writes, "We must learn thinking, because our being able to think, or even gifted for it, is still no guarantee that we are capable of thinking. To be capable, we must before all else incline towards what addresses us in thought. That is what of itself gives food for thought. What gives us this gift, the gift of what must properly be thought, is what we call most thought-provoking." The gift of teachability, then, that's the end of the quote. The gift of teachability arrives to the apprentice in the form of evocative speech, where she or he is held out before the nothing, a possibility. The original message received by the apprentice, the original initial provocation which turns him around, is called the original revelation. This original revelation signifies the reposing of the apprentices, the letting be of learning. Only, quote, "only on the ground of this original revelation of the nothing can human existence approach and penetrate beings. Without the original revelation of the nothing, no selfhood, no freedom," unquote. The original revelation which initiates learning identifies the location of philosophical wandering. This ground which we break and upon which we make paths is the abyss into which we make our leap when we get underway with learning. When we leap onto this ground, we have been released from the static domesticity of our solitary, egoistic habitat. To wander into learning is to be, quote, "held out to the nothing," unquote, identified as possibility in the most radical sense we can imagine. To be released is to be freed from repetition, routine, recurrence. In this releasement, we are held out before possibility, or the condition for our being spontaneous, improvisational, and novel. We are called back to our original modality of making, of initiating, of creating, when we are held out for questioning. To be held out for questioning is to have our sayings received poetically and to be questioned by the first questions. The sage poses these questions, and in doing so offers the gift of teachability and thereby lets learning happen. The ultimate and evocative first questions are what are most thought-provoking, because they reflect the twofold play of being's processual unfolding. The questions are unanswerable, concealing, hiding, and withdrawing, but our exploration of them is meaningful. The meaning we make of our lives is produced in our response to these questions. Who we are, as opposed to what we are, appears or discloses itself in our response to these questions. In posing evocative questions and offering the gift of teachability, the sage recalls the apprentice to the location where learning unfolds. This location designates a modality or way of being. This modality, which emerges from being reposed and released, is called freedom. Freedom signifies the second manner of wandering, the way learning unfolds. To be free in learning is, first and foremost, to be turned away from the enclosedness of the self-certain subject. To be drawn out from this self-certainty is to be turned away from the domestic habitat and drawn onto the unstable and unpredictable ground of the nothing. This ground signifies possibility, and possibility is the essence of freedom. But to be released from the routine repetition of domesticity means to be turned toward the alterity of the other, to be estranged from the certainty of subjectivity. This estrangement provoked by the evocative saying of the sage, releases insofar as it opens. To be opened to the Otra is to be released from the confines of the self. To be released from the self is to be turned towards and attuned to the horizon of beings and being. This attunement is freedom as the, quote, engagement in the disclosure of beings as such. Disclosedness itself is conserved in existence, engagement, through which the openness of the open region, in other words, the there, da, is what it is. That's a quote from Heidegger. Heidegger's name for what we are calling learner is Dasein. Dasein captures the twofold modality of wandering as both a ground upon which we are grounded or rooted and a ground upon which we proceed or move. Dasein, as the condition of learning, is both the way and the where. Quote, in Dasein, the essential ground, long ungrounded, on the basis of which man is able to exist, is preserved for him. Here, existence does not mean existentia in the sense of occurring or being at hand. Nor, on the other hand, does it mean in the existential fashion man's moral endeavor on behalf of his self, based on his psychophysical constitution. Existence, rooted in truth as freedom, is exposure to the disclosedness of beings as such. Still unperceived, indeed, not even in need of an essential grounding, the existence of historical man begins at the moment when the first thinker takes a questioning stand with regard to the unconcealment of being by asking, what are beings? In this question, unconcealment as the encounter of being, as the releasement into the encounter of difference, is experienced for the first time. Unquote. We call the first thinker the sage, the teacher who reposes the learner and draws her on the path of philosophical wandering when he offers a gift of teachability in the form of the question, who are you? In posing this question, the sage draws the apprentice into the open region of questioning where existence reposing occurs. If existence is, quote, rooted in truth as freedom, unquote, then freedom designates the truth which is disclosed in and through philosophical wandering. The essence of learning is freedom. And that is exactly how it ends on 3/23/2004. Read this day, 3/23/2014, and read from Being and Learning, pages 61 to 63. And I have to say, it felt really dramatic and really good to read from the book, and I'm feeling this impulse now. I'm feeling the impulse to read Being and Learning. I'm feeling the impulse to find exactly where the meditations correspond to the book, and I'm finding that what I now want to do is to read right from the book. Of course, I've talked already in the commentaries that I write in the blog that what I want to do for Being and Learning 3.0 in 10 years' time is to have distilled this down to fragments or even aphorisms, which was something I thought about doing, and I mentioned this to Audrey Thompson, and I remember being at the PES in 2005, and I don't remember where it was. I can't think back that far, or I can think back that far, I just don't recall where it was. And I actually had one of the binders with me, so I was kind of showing it around to folks, and also reading and editing it. I think that's the reason I had it, as I was editing it. It may have been later, I don't remember, but I remember saying to her, you know what, I think I would like to do something a la Wittgenstein and just have like sentences, sentences. Her eyebrows sort of raised, because that was probably the last person that she thought that I would be comparing the effort to, but it was the form. You know, I respect the form. I may not do what he did. I definitely don't do what he did, but you know, he was caught up with language in the way that I'm caught up. Not in the way, but also, you know. So his was also struggle with language, and so the brilliance and the elegance of his ability to just sort of get it down to sentences. That would be for me being 3.0. But at any rate, being 2.0 has me on this date reading right from being and learning. And you know, I once again, you know, I guess that would be something that I would highlight is just this dropping down into this statement that I repeat again and again, but not in the way that things were being repeated in the beginning. If anybody has watched any of these videos, the first week or so, I was talking about things being condensed, compressed was the word I used. And I was talking about the sense in which at the beginning, a lot of the writing is just working out the initial language and working out the initial rhythm. And I gotta, you know, give a shout out to my other Utah colleagues, Audrey and now Frank Margonis. They're both in the same department. And Frank mentioned to me that he was reading Being and Learning, coming off of a hip surgery, and he was on some pretty heavy painkillers. And he said that he really enjoyed reading Being and Learning as he was sort of recuperating, which I thought was kind of a kick. But I really appreciated that he was reading the book, of course. But the point is, I said, you know, your writing is really rhythmical. And I mean, for sure, I'm a drummer. You know, first before I ever wrote any philosophy that I would consider philosophy, I was playing drums as a kid. And although I was writing, I did write poetry when I was about the same time I started playing drums and being, you know, learning the drums. All that to say is that, you know, there's something about the writing here that it's all about rhythm and it's all about making something. And in the beginning, it was really difficult because I was compressing the ideas. I said compression because it reminded me, or the only analogy I could get, and as arrogant as this may sound, is the formation of crystals or diamonds. That's not to say that, I mean, I do think that these certain lines here are sort of like little nuggets, you know, and I guess you could say they crystallize, the ideas crystallize. And the way they do that is through this repetition that is kind of like compression, right? So there's something about that, and I haven't studied this, I haven't looked it up, I haven't, you know, searched around to find out if there's like a theory of writing or a tradition of writing out there that talks about not writing the same thing over and over again, but coming back and building on things to the extent to which there are certain sentences that are very similar, and you're moving words around, and you're sort of repeating in a certain way, a la certain kinds of contemporary or modern orchestral music, that you're repeating the same theme over and over and over again, and you know, and you're building in some way, right, through the repetition. So early on, you had this kind of what I call compression that's pushing down, pushing down, pushing down on the ideas to produce some key claims, key ideas, key words, key phrases. And one of them is the essence of learning is freedom. You know, that may be, you know, what is the sort of aphorism or the key whole, if you will. It kind of opens it all up. You know, if you sort of meditate on that, the essence of learning is freedom, it'll get you somewhere in terms of understanding this. All right. So having said all that, then you know, freedom here is key. And what's nice is to see, you know, to go back and recognize that Heidegger offers us up some important support here. Now, one of the things that I repeat, and this isn't really in terms of compression, but and it's something I do in the book, because I'm not making an argument, it's a phenomenology, right? So I come back and I quote again this quotation from Heidegger on without freedom. I'm sorry. Well, okay. So existence, which is going to be different from any existential and any existentia, is so EK, capital EK, SIST. That's going to be Heidegger's sort of word for something that is beyond all particular beings. He said existence, rooted in truth as freedom, is exposure to the disclosedness of beings as such. So this is in a key phrase, and what I'm doing here by quoting Heidegger and then repeating this idea of rooted in truth as freedom, is to go back a couple of days where I was quoting Lao Tzu and talking about going to the root, going to the roots of things, going to the ground. And the last couple of days I've been sort of playing with Heidegger and Lao Tzu's notions of philosophy as taking us to the root of being, right, and where things open up for us. And so what I'm trying to do with that is to talk about then the philosophy of the sage as gathering together a community, a philosophy of the people that is wandering. And so in this wandering, what's happening is that we're groundbreaking. We're breaking paths. So philosophy as the breaking of ground, as groundbreaking, in the sense that you say, well, that was a groundbreaking moment. Philosophy has this sort of sense of which it is existential groundbreaking. It takes us to new places. And this is why I say learning, the essence of learning is freedom, because it's in that movement, in that groundbreaking, or in that path breaking, that we experience freedom. And it's most and for me, this is learning understood as essentially freedom, right? Because what's happening is we're unfolding in that moment. Now I wanted to and what is it that we're learning? Well, Heidegger has this term, disclosedness, right? So he says, because disclosedness itself is conserved in existent engagement, through which the openness of the open region, in other words, the there, shows itself. So the Da of Dasein, the there, shows itself in what he calls existent engagement, which happens through disclosedness. So that's the essence of phenomenology, right? So if what happens is that the process or the experience begins with being disclosing itself to us, right? Then it's in that moment where we experience that disclosedness of being, which is what Heidegger calls existent engagement. That's when phenomenology arrives as the sort of key for our understanding of the way we ought to engage if we're going to be engaging truthfully, right? So the truth is appearance. It's the way in which things appear. It's disclosedness, right? So that's why, and so much of the writing, and so much of the writing is being in learning, and so much of the writing I've done elsewhere, for me the reduction is always to a kind of perception, reception of listening, right? And so for the most part, so it all sort of begins in that moment of reception where we're listening to the other. And so the reduction it reduces to being, disclosedness, and existence engagement, where we're receiving that disclosedness. I'm running over time a bit here, but I wanted to find that quotation from Heidegger that I was reading, and when I read it, I realized that it's not the thought-provoking. To be free in learning is first and foremost to be turned away from enclosedness, right? So that's really important. This distinction between being enclosed, enclosedness, staying within, what I call the enclosedness of the certain subject, is now distinguished or sort of in contrast to disclosedness. So and that's the whole notion of the domestic. So the enclosure of domestic philosophy is in contrast to the disclosure of what's now existent philosophy, or what I call wandering philosophy, nomadic philosophy, the philosophy of the wild, where we're moving outward, right? And so the moving outward in itself is a kind of disclosedness, but this is all getting put underway by the original disclosedness. In fact, Heidegger talks about the original here as the first thinker. The existence of historical man begins at the moment when the first thinker takes a questioning stand with regard to the unconcealment of beings. What are beings? So the first response to disclosedness is, well, what is this? What is this? But this notion that he talks of a first thinker. Again, that has to do a lot with my interest in originary thinking. Here it is. So, exactly on this point of the original revelation. So, Heidegger talks of the original revelation, which is part of the effacement. So it's not origin in the sense, I mean, it is and it isn't. It is origin in the sense of, we have to think of going back to our great, 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 great ancestors, right? The first humans, and the awe that they had with just, fire, and the stars. And if that sort of, and that's embedded in us, right, as human beings, is that early experience. But, and this is the key to this notion of ceaseless nativity that I keep talking about, but hasn't yet appeared in the writing. This is repeated, and I think this is Arendt's point with thinking. I mean, we kind of go back into that state of what the Greeks called wonder, thaumusai, when thinking gets underway, when philosophy gets underway. So it's both in time, millennia ago, right? But it's also something that gets repeated, right? In the way that, for example, liberation theology talks about, the crucifixion and the resurrection happening every day, every moment with the poor, right? So we live it every day. And so this original revelation then is both something that happened historically many millennia ago, but it's also something that happens each and every time we're engaged in what I'm calling learning, which is the experience of philosophy. So this original revelation signifies the reposing, so the turning around, questioning, replacing, right? Taking out of and then sitting down, so to speak, of the repentiences, the letting be of learning. Quote, only on the ground of the original revelation of the nothing can human existence approach and penetrate beings. Without the original revelation of the nothing, no selfhood, no freedom. Now, I've already quoted that, but now, quoting it again, bringing it again, it has a sort of a context, right? I don't want to say new meaning, because the meaning isn't new. It's just placed within a different context. And so we can hear it differently. And we can hear it in a much more significant way, because now original revelation is placed within the work that's been done in terms of disclosedness and the reception of that disclosedness. And not only that, it gets linked to selfhood and freedom. So freedom and selfhood sort of arise from this original revelation, right? And again, the nothing has been taken on 4 or 5 meanings. I'm not going to rehearse those here, but for the sake of this reading, I would just say that the nothing here is the disclosedness of being. So the fact that being shows itself and then hides or withdraws in Heidegger is signifying the sense in which a clearing, or what he calls the open region, the openness of the open region. That openness, something opens up for us, which is where we can step in and we can, what I say, leap into. And that's how we make our freedom, in that leap. And in that, as I've talked about in many meditations and ad nauseum perhaps, is that we're making, I said in here making meaning, but meaning isn't really what we're talking about. It's making something. It's something that the worldly existence, something that we share with others. All right, so we'll see what I do tomorrow. I know that I do have the next pages, so I'll either read right from Being and Learning, or I'll read from the pages. I don't know. That's to be decided.